Hey there, I'm Jared with the Vegetable Academy, and in this video I'm going to show you how we make our soil blocks. We'll divide this into three parts. The first part will explain the ingredients that are in our soil block mix. The second part will cover the tools and the process that we use to make the mix. And lastly, we'll talk about the tools and the process that we use to make the blocks. So that's all coming up. Stay tuned. Alright, let's begin by covering the ingredients that are in our soil block mix. I'll introduce each ingredient and explain the purpose of it as well, in case you want to substitute it with something else. We'll start things off with peat moss, which is the most prominent ingredient in the mix. The purpose of the peat moss is to absorb and hold a lot of moisture within the blocks, and it also is quite fibrous. If you take a close look at peat moss, you'll notice it's got a lot of tiny fibers in there that serve to hold the blocks together. When the blocks are first formed, you need these fibers. Later on, once the plant's roots have grown throughout the blocks, you don't need these fibers as much, but that's essential. This is an essential ingredient to keep the blocks intact when you're starting out. Next ingredient is compost. So compost also has a lot of organic matter in it, but what we really want are those small humus particles that will act like the glue for our blocks. When they're wet, they'll glue all of these other particles together within our blocks and help things stick together nicely. So our blocks have a higher percentage of compost than a typical store-bought potting soil mix would have. Compost, of course, also serves as an enrichment to the fertility of the soil block, providing a lot of essential minerals for your plants. And the last major ingredient in volume is perlite. Perlite is a light, extremely porous material. The major role of perlite within the blocks is to maintain the flow of air and water through the blocks. So they help water drain through the blocks, and they help air remain present within those blocks. Without perlite, we can compress the blocks tighter and squeeze all the air out of the blocks, and we'd have a risk of having more of an anaerobic environment there without enough oxygen for the roots. Roots really need oxygen, and perlite helps to keep those pockets of oxygen available for your roots. I think that's about it about perlite. In addition to those three major ingredients, we also have a couple of minor ingredients that help to enrich the mix. So let's cover those next. We use an organic slow-release fertilizer mixed right into the soil block mix. So the only thing that we need to add afterward is water to the mix. We're not fertilizing our blocks constantly. We're just putting a slow-release fertilizer into the block mix and letting the plants access that as they need. So we use a Gaia 444 mix right now. It's just a nice blend. As we water the blocks just with ordinary water from now on, like after they're planted, this fertilizer will just be available to those plants as they need it. We don't have a risk of burning the plants by mixing something wrong in a solution or at too high of a concentration. It's just a nice slow release, safe solution to the fertilizer problem. We also want to adjust the pH of the peat moss a little bit. Peat moss is a bit acidic, so we want to add some basic lime to the mix just to adjust that slightly. And the last minor ingredient we like to add, especially if I know my plants are going to be in my blocks for quite a few weeks, then I want to make sure that all of my micronutrients are available once those plants start growing. So we cover that angle with rock dust. Just a small amount of rock dust in our block mix, mixed right in, make sure that we've got all the micronutrients covered as well. Okay, I think that covers it all. To review, we've got peat moss, compost, and perlite as the structural elements, and we've got lime to tweak the acidity, and a slow release fertilizer, and rock dust to make sure we've got great fertility the whole time. So that's a look at our mix ingredients. Now let's shift into the next step of the lesson, which is how we make our mix. I'll share a link to all of our recipes that we use. We do have a couple of different recipes that we use at different stages. We'll start with the very simplest recipe for our smallest soil block maker, just this little guy, this 3/4 inch block maker. So Because these blocks are so small, we actually don't use all the ingredients here. We just start with a block mix made out of compost and peat moss. And the special thing about these ingredients are that they're both screened with a 1/4 inch screen. So I'll just pop this screen over these buckets and fill them up from our larger supplies of peat moss. All the smaller particles go through and the bigger particles get tossed to the side. So that's a simple process, but it's an important one for this 3/4 inch block making here. Our ratio for these ingredients is 3 parts peat moss and 1 part compost. Again, they're serving the same roles as they do in the larger blocks. Peat moss is like the rebar that's holding everything together or tying everything together, and compost is the glue. And we're not really concerned with fertility straight off the bat here, because the seeds are going to emerge out of these 3/4 inch blocks and quickly be transplanted up to a larger block. So we're just concerned about having a structural medium to hold these baby roots once they've started to emerge. Okay, a little bit of water here. I'll just mix it up here. Always takes a bit of time for the water to really start to be absorbed by the peat moss, especially if you're coming in with a really dry product to begin with. It's amazing how much water this organic material can absorb. Okay, I've added a bit too much water, no problem though. I can make a quick adjustment here just by sprinkling a bit more peat moss on top without adjusting my ratio too much. It's going to be a pretty mucky mix that you're dealing with here. But there shouldn't be any pools of water sitting around in your mix. It's an indication you're oversaturated. Just a bit more peat moss here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Nice dark mix ready to go. So that's how we make that first version of the mix. Now let's scale up a bit and talk about how we make a larger batch for all of our 1 inch blocks or 1.5 inch blocks, 2 inch blocks, and even 4 inch blocks. So set this aside. Now for this larger batch, we're going to use a big tub, and one of the major characteristics I like for tubs is a shape that's round. It allows you to get into all the corners. Well, there are fewer corners, first of all. If we had a square or rectangular tub, you're always going to lose part of your mix in those corners, and it's going to take longer to mix. So a nice round tub works the best for your mixing. And you could use a shovel. Something with a decent length of handle gives you more leverage, as opposed to using just a hand trowel like this. But my favorite tool for mixing is a drill hooked up to a plaster mixer. So you can just put this down into our mix and hold on tight, and that'll make quick work of our mixing job. Okay, I've got everything pre-measured, so I'm just going to start by dumping it in here. If you're doing a lot of mix, you might want to consider wearing a mask for this process, because a lot of these materials are a little bit dusty. I don't pay any attention really to the order of things here. It's all going to get mixed together eventually. If anything, I would usually add the perlite first, because it's the dustiest of the three. Then I can cover it up and stop perlite particles from blowing around. Then our lime goes in. Followed by our fertilizer. And lastly, our rock dust. That takes care of the dry ingredients. Now water is the last thing to add, and it's the most important ingredient for getting the consistency of your block mix correct. Too much water and you end up with a really muddy mix that compresses too much. If you have too dry of a mix, it won't stick enough, and you'll usually end up with pockets of or quarters of blocks that aren't complete within your block makers. So we don't really want to get this right, and once we add some water and end up with the finished product here, I'll show you what the end mix should look like. This part we'll do on the ground though. Okay, that was pretty quick with just a single recipe of our mix. I think we've got a pretty good balance here already. So pull this out and show you a little bit about what we want to look for to make sure our mix is about the right level of moisture. The test that I'll do if I'm not sure is to just grab a handful and squeeze it. And it should be wet enough that water actually drips out between my fingers. So that's enough. That's a sign there that it's wet enough. Is it too wet? That question involves looking down to see if there are puddles of water within your mix. If it's not holding all of the water that you've given it, then it's definitely too wet. You want to add a little bit more peat moss and even a bit more compost, the two elements that will absorb a lot of water. Add that organic matter in just a little bit greater amount to your mix, and that'll soak up that extra water, and you'll still be fine to move forward. Alright, we're clean. We've got our mixes ready to go. Let's talk about blocks now. Let's get the space cleared up. We'll get our mini mix back out here again. And the tools that we use for our block making are the standard block makers that you'll see on the market, beginning with our 3/4 inch block maker here and our mini mix. I also like to have a nice flat square trowel available just to scrape the bottom of the block makers off before pressing the blocks out. And you'll notice that we also use our homemade wood trays as well. You can use standard plastic seed starting trays, but it is nice to have some sidewalls removed here to remove these blocks easily with a trowel. And I also like avoiding plastic and having a nice sturdy tray to use out in the field as well. So let's make some blocks. The block making action looks like this. You'll place your block maker over top of your mix in several different places just to make sure you're adding pressure in all of the holes. I scrape off the bottom of that block maker and eject the blocks by pressing down on the top of the block maker while at the same time pulling up the frame with my fingers. So this part's moving down, the frame's moving up and releasing the blocks. And if you've done a good job of compressing your blocks and releasing them, you'll end up with a nice balanced set of blocks there ready to go. That's 3/4 inch block making right there. Now let's move on up to the 1.5 inch block maker. Set this aside. The next two block makers that we'll use will be the 1.5 inch block maker and the 2 inch block maker. The first step in making blocks with these larger block makers is just to transfer some of our block mix into a container with a flat surface. Now the reason for this is if I were just to press my block maker into a giant mound of potting soil mix, it would just keep compressing farther and farther into the pile. I need this flat surface on the bottom of my bin to compress that soil mix right up into my block maker. So that's why having a smaller bin like this, or even just a larger flat Rubbermaid bin, like, to give you a large flat surface to press against is important. So this process is much the same as the 3/4 inch block. You need a bit more body weight here. So I press down, get my weight onto it, wiggle around a little bit, press it in a few different places to make sure I've really squeezed soil into each of these block cavities. Scrape the bottom with my trowel, and then eject the blocks into my tray. Again, it's a weird kind of thing here. You're pressing down on the top handle while pulling up slowly with your fingers to release the form. If you do that right, you end up with a nice set of 1.5 inch blocks with a little dibble out of the middle where you can put your seed. People always ask, do these hold together? Yes, they hold together just fine, as long as you get these ratios right in the mix and the moisture right. Next one we'll look at is our 2-inch blocker. Same process here. The difference with this blocker is that we usually use it to pot up our smaller 3/4 inch blocks. So what you'll notice inside here are larger dibblers. These are 3/4 inch cubes, and they'll serve to press out cavities within the blocks so that when we want to transfer our little 3/4 inch blocks up to the larger size, they can slide right in. So I'll show you what I mean here. Same process, squeezing and wiggling as we do so. Get the mix in all those cavities, scrape the bottom flat, and press. Alright, that's pretty decent. Not 100%, but I'll give myself like an 85%. Okay, I'm just noticing that I had a bit of crud here stuck alongside of the dibblers. So I'll show you a tip that we use to get rid of that problem. And that is just to have a nice little dipping bucket of water to give the block maker a nice rinse before you make your next set of blocks. Give it a nice rinse. The soil will come off much easier when you make your next press. So let's try that. Okay, here we go. Scrape the bottom flat and press. Oh yeah, a little bit sharper now, and no residue left around my dibblers there, so that's nice. So yeah, keep that in mind for a tip if you find your soil mix is sticking to your block makers inside here. Two reasons for that are that your block mix is too dry and block makers coated in crud. So give it a rinse, make sure your block mix has enough water. Your block should emerge a little smoother that way. So there's a look at our first few sizes. Blocks, we got the 3/4 inch, the 1.5 inch, and the 2 inch. The largest block that we use here is the 4-inch block, so let's do that one next. Here's a look at this block maker. It's massive, sounds like a cowbell, looks like a cowbell, but it functions really great as a soil block maker. Okay, and this one takes up a large volume of soil, so I can usually just press it right into our main mix bucket here. Gotta lower this table a bit. That's better. Alright. Same process. Press, wiggle, give the bottom of the block a scrape, and then press. You press firmly down as you're pulling up the form. There you have it. There's our huge 4-inch block ready to go. So we use these trays for all of our blocks. We can fit 8 of these large blocks in one tray, 36 of the 2-inch blocks in one tray, 60 of the 1.5-inch blocks, and like hundreds of the 3/4-inch blocks. So there's a look at the full lineup except for one block maker. There are a lot of plants that work well for starting in like the 1-inch size block range, and I wanted a way to make our block making process go a little faster. So we did invest in a large 35 block press here. These are all 1-inch blocks that come out of here, and we use this for lettuce, beets, onions when we're starting them as single plants. So, and with this block size, I can fit 90 blocks per tray. Process with this one is the exact same. I'll do it standing up though to get more of my body weight into it. And I'll be able to fill up a tray faster, so I like that. Okay, but back to the cool thing about these blocks. I mentioned that they were really easy to pot up once you've made the 3/4-inch blocks, the 2-inch blocks, and the 4-inch blocks. So let's have a look at that process really quickly. It's just as easy as picking up a 3/4-inch block, sliding it into the hole of a 2-inch block, letting the plant grow for a couple more weeks, and then sliding that 2-inch block into the 4-inch block. That's part of the beauty of these soil blocks, folks. They're just really slick to work with when you're potting up plants. I'll finish by saying that, like learning any skill, this is going to take some practice just to get the balance of your ingredients right, to get the sense for how to use these soil block makers, to get them to compact properly and release properly in your tray. That's a skill, and it's going to take practice. But with time, you'll be able to master this block making process. And if you do get frustrated in the early days here, know that it's possible. I can confidently make blocks of any size now without any uncertainty or irregularities. So know that it's possible. I'm here to help you along the way too. All right, let's wrap up with a little summary of what we covered today. We started with a quick summary of the ingredients that go into our block mix and the reasons for each of those ingredients. If you wanted a printout of all those recipes that we use with specific measurements, just head to our online classroom, type in soil block mix recipes, and you'll get a full post with a link that you can download there. The next thing that we covered today was how we mix our soil block mix. And aside from just throwing all the ingredients in a bucket and mixing it with a shovel, I let you know that one of the major factors in getting your block mix to perform well for you is getting the right amount of water in your mix. And that's a matter of experimenting with adding too much water and then not enough water and observing the differences. You'll figure it out. There is that perfect balance in there. And the last thing I showed you was how we use our soil block makers to press nicely formed blocks that are ready to start our seeds. So there's a quick look at our soil block making process. I hope you found this quick tutorial helpful. Of course, we all know that this is just a small piece of the puzzle. There are a lot of other things you need to figure out to grow vegetables successfully at home, to start seeds indoors, to transplant them outdoors, to get all your irrigation, everything set up right. And that's what I'm here for. So if you want to learn more about growing your own food, head over to vegetableacademy.com. Check out the online classroom. There are a ton of resources there just waiting for you to explore, and I'll be there on the other side to help you out. Talk to you later.